A level 3 out of 5 enhanced risk is in place today for a broad portion of the Midwest, being northern, kind of this north central Illinois region, regions up to Chicago, Peoria, Champaign, out here into portions of northeast Missouri as well, and even portions up here in Indiana, all the way to this Michigan border. I made a video on this yesterday, and I wanted to give a forecast update because things have changed overnight to some degree. A lot of the environment is very similar, so I'm not going to go over that in this video. If you want to check that out or have information on that, check the other video. But the main thing that has changed is going to be our tornado outlook. So first of all, I want to make sure I explain the SBC outlook, how this has changed. We have this hatching risk. Usually with hatch risks in the old outlook system, this was only when you had 10% or greater 10% or greater confidence in tornadoes of EF2 plus intensity. Now this is a case of reasonable max intensity is the best way to look at this. So EF2 is a reasonable max intensity does not mean that tornadoes can't get above that threshold, but it typically means that tornadoes will be about EF2, mostly in the EF0 to EF1 range, not as big deal tornadoes. Once you get to this hatch risk, that's when significant tornadoes come on the table. EF2 damage becomes possible, and this is the significant 2 area. This is the first time we've seen this with a tornado outlook in the as after they changed on March 3rd. And this is outlining portions, basically right where that 10% risk was, some sections of southwest Michigan, this broad portion in Illinois, and portions in Indiana. This means that the maximum reasonable intensity is EF3 or greater, as my birds go crazy in the background. EF2, EF3 or greater tornadoes are possible. This is what EF3 damage looks like, so we can really look at that and understand. EF3s can be in the 160 mile per hour range for winds on the upper end. This is the kind of damage that an EF3 can do to someone's house, and I wanted to make sure that you guys are aware of. This is why they've updated this chart, is to show the greater probabilities and really kind of show intensity a little better on the SPC outlooks. The other main thing is, continuing with this outlook as well, is the hail probabilities in a large portion of the states. Tornadoes are mostly confined to Illinois and some of Indiana here. Hail is confined to a lot larger of a region, with hail up to 2 inches or greater in size being possible. Again, that is somewhere around the egg size to tennis ball size. Thank you for this graphic online. Fairly rare, especially up here in Illinois. Not typically seen too often. You might see, if you see hail on an SPC outlook in regards of this region here, they are typically expecting quarter size hail or greater, but usually somewhere around quarter size hail. We're expecting up to egg size or tennis ball size today, even up to baseball size if things are able to get going well enough. I'm not going to look as much at the real synoptic pattern today. I just want to look at some of the kind of the high resolution models and show you how the reflectivity will look. And I actually realized I forgot to throw up to my website, so let me throw those up really quickly here. Throw up the pen as well, just because it's useful. I do also apologize for the birds in the background. It's the morning, and they love to freak out in the morning hours. So the first thing I wanted to look at is the HER model. This is typically what I'll use in forecasts. We're going to see if this 12Z goes out far enough. It does seem to. Let's first look at our 11Z HER, though, just because I know in more confidence. So the HER model has pretty much clear skies over Illinois for a while. And I actually didn't open StatRad. Let me open that real quick. I do want to give us the first overview. You can see here pretty much clear skies over much of the forecast region for today, indicating that instability is going to continue to build in throughout the day and likely be strong enough later in the day for storms. That's similar to what the HER model has here. No convection, no rain, or anything is ongoing. Here on 18Z, that's 1 p.m. Central Time, you get our first blips of thunderstorms possible, basically indicating that convective initiation might occur around 1 p.m. with actually a quick upscale growth here on the HER model, but these are going to be semi-discrete supercells developing in regions of Illinois, moving into the Chicagoland region, possibly impacting regions here in Indiana as well. You can see a cell like here, for example, this one that I'm outlining right here. If this storm is able to stay discrete, that's where you can get those really intense tornadoes. Now, don't take the HER model to truth like this. You have this discrete cell, but this is simply an example of the environment that could form. This does not mean that the cell is going to form in that one location. And these cells do look somewhat elevated. So the updraft helicities does not mean that this is where storms are going to fire and where they're going to have tornadoes. If we knew that in advance, we'd be a lot better forecasters. Basically, you have these discrete cells here that are going to have posed probably the most significant tornado threat early on. This is the same area I outlined yesterday, basically in this corridor right here where cells can stay mostly discrete. Then later on into the nighttime, right around sundown at 7 p.m., we had a large area of basically hail production, a lot of elevated storms here, north of the warm front, most likely. In some regard, some of these may be surface-based closer to the warm front. I just looked at this is temperature here. Again, your warm front is situated right around here. I'm going to go back to reflectivity, essentially the radar. Some of these storms to the north may be elevated and a little bit less good of a environment, but they might have a solid hail threat as well associated with them, as will these ones here, but these might be more tornadic and based towards the ground. Either way, all of these will have updraft helicity to them, and hail is definitely going to be a contender for today. That's basically how the HER model depicts this. Let me see what the 12Z has, if it goes out far enough. I'm curious where this fires storms. Seems to develop storms in a similar area in central Illinois here. And again, similar kind of discrete nature to some of these as well, with this one specific storm firing up again on this front. The NAM Nest model does not have nearly as discrete storm development really out ahead, if anything at all, which does indicate some of the uncertainty. Personally speaking, I don't see a scenario where this environment out here in central Illinois fires nothing. I don't believe the NAM is looking at this correctly. It might have a cold bias, which it does actually. NAM does have a cold bias. It might not be developing storms. But either way, even on the NAM, you can see a pretty quick upscale growth. I also don't trust this wind line that it's making, if I'm being completely honest with you. I think the high reflectivities being shown by the NAM here are realistic, with the high, the high reflectivity indicating kind of hail producers. There's definitely instability being had here in that region, and it'll be north of the warm front. Not surprise me for those cells producing some pretty strong downdrafts and hail associated with them. But I'm not 100% sold on how the NAM nest has developed with this setup. I do think, though, again, you can see little blips here indicating that convective initiation tries to start around 2 p.m. Into 3 and 4 and 5. I do wonder why these don't completely develop, but maybe that's neither here nor there. Again, some of the specifics of this event were mentioned in the last video. If you want to see more of why the storms are firing there, you can feel free to check that out, but I just did want to look more at the specific reflectivity today because that's something I wanted to focus on. I'm looking at the HREF viewer now, and this is the high resolution ensemble forecast. Essentially what this is it's an ensemble of many of the high resolution models like the HER, the NAM Nest, some of these NSSL models, the WRF I believe is involved in those. These help to give, that's the wrong sector. These help to give basically a better view of how the different cams are agreeing with time. So what I want to put on here is updraft helicity probabilities, and you're going to see the HRRR's updraft helicity. Updraft helicity is basically rotation in thunderstorms, basically indicating where supercells are trying to develop. The HER has the storms forming pretty early in the day, unlike some of these other models. But you can see here, right around 21Z, you get that first blip of storm development there in kind of north central Illinois, maybe a little west areas near Peoria. Putnam County is right there. With time, you see the updraft helicity the probabilities greatly improve in this little belt right here. This is 50% coverage right there. Sorry, not 50%, 50% probability in that little bullseye right there. Indicating that supercells definitely could be forming there, and we could have some pretty tight mesocyclones. Not all going to be producing tornadoes, so this is not a doomsday event if you live in this portion of Illinois, but it means that you should be keeping an eye on the weather today. Similar to regions anywhere really in this 10% contour, I think you should be looking at the weather today. Again, in my personal forecast, I think this is the area where severe tornadoes, big thunderstorms like that, this is where I am most concerned about personally. I think this is the best environment. This is where tornadoes will continue to be the most discreet, and I believe they'll be able to take a lot of that warm air up into their updrafts, which is really going to help their development. So I would especially be watching if you are in these counties. Again, that's Putnam County there. I believe LaSalle is right here. I brushed up since the last video, I guess. Will County, Kankakee County, Grundy, and I forget these two. I know Grundy is in here somewhere. These counties I've outlined here need to be paying attention. Even portions here in Indiana, that's LaPorte County, Porter, Lake, parts of Cook County in Illinois. Just to be keeping an eye on the weather today, especially if you're in any of these risks for today. Lastly, I can look at some of the other cam models. That's the main reason I wanted to look at the href, just because it is a good viewer at everything together. We're also going to be looking at all of these together with me right now. I haven't looked at all of these yet, so we're going to see my live reaction to these ones here. I think something important to take away from here is going to be this updraft helicity probability. Again, I'm just most concerned about this little belt right here. I think that's where storms are going to have the best time developing. And just be the most discreet if they're able to. But there is a lot of questions to be had of where are the storms actually going to develop, where are they going to be most healthy. This is still based on runs from 0Z yesterday. That's 7 p.m. yesterday. It's 12 hours later, and the new href has not yet come in. So again, there is some uncertainty. But if you are in that area there with the actually doesn't look like I can, unfortunately. But if you're in this region here of maximum tornado probability, especially the max intensity, I would be keeping an eye on your weather throughout most of the day. If you're in this 5%, again, keep your eye on the weather for most of the day today. It's going to be, it could be a pretty big event based on the instability. The moisture is pretty unseasonable, and the intensity of some of these tornadoes would be pretty intense. It's just something you wouldn't really see typically in March in Illinois. That's why I'm trying to stress this. I don't want to stress a doomsday scenario, but today could be a pretty big day, I believe. Move forward here. Here's another model. Storm development seems to happen a little further west here. Again, I apologize again for the birds. A little further west here. Portions more elevated convection out here, it looks like, before some more upscale growth around, basically right after dark, around 8 p.m. So luckily not going to be during rush hour, but portions out here could see very quick, possibly some discrete cells early on in their lifetime. That's probably a little far north, but this whole general region could see some storms forming early on in their lifetime, likely going elevated pretty quickly if you're north of I-80 here. That's what the Chicago AFDs have been talking about. Tornado threat in this region decreases significantly, as well as tornado threat in regions with the lake breeze. I've been saying to watch out for this a lot, but the lake breeze could actually be kind of a saving grace for some portions here in regions closer to Lake Michigan. Something to keep in mind for today. Let's check some of the other cams before I end this video. Here's the Rufus model. I don't like putting this model on my channel, but this is usually kind of the worst case model. It tends to fire convection like crazy, really intense. This is similar to what we saw. This actually might be an old. That was an old run I just looked at. This is a more recent run of the Rufus. It's RRFS. We call it the Rufus. Usually pretty doomsday, but similar to some of the other models, it does have storms developing later on in the day. This one does not have storms developing in the central of the state, which is interesting to see. I definitely think the environment is there for any storms developing in this region. It just depends on how they move on with time. If bubbly cumulus just happens not to form, like I guess the Rufus is saying, then you won't get development there. But either way, you can see very strong cores here, those purples in there indicating hail. And very quickly, just a very quick upscale growth, with hail being a very primary threat in regions of northern Illinois today. So that's about all I have for this video. There's a lot of different models that will look at this and say, here's what I think is going to happen. And the other one will say, here's what I think is going to happen. And they all are a little bit different. So please keep an eye on the weather today. It's in enhanced risks like this. You should be keeping an eye on the weather, probably checking it at least once an hour, if not maybe every half hour. Keep an eye out for, if you want to know more about what the environment is for today. Mesoscale discussions are good. Listen to any tornado watches that are most likely to come out today. Just be weather aware today. It could be a pretty big day here in Illinois, and it's not too often I say that, but I am somewhat worried about this setup. So I just want to make sure people are aware of the threat for today, because this could be something where there's definitely possible that nothing really develops too much, but this also could be a pretty big day for portions of Illinois as my alarm goes off there. So I will be out there chasing today, so I will hopefully have an update if anything else comes out. I will put that in my channel post. I want to make sure I had at least a video out for today, just because it's nicer to see moving radar imagery on a model rather than it is for me just to say, here's what's going to happen today on a little post. So that's all I'll have for today. Again, thank you for watching. Thanks for some of the recent support, and please do stay safe today.